Hi guys, I have a book review for you this morning. It's by an author I haven't read too much of in the past, say, 6 or 8 years, but I picked this up a few weeks ago, and I'll just show you the book now. The writer is Doctorow, and I read Homer and Langley. Just for those of you who don't know, Homer and Langley are actually two historical people. They're the Collier brothers, Collyer, and I guess if you wanted to stick sort of a moniker on them, you could call them the original hoarders. Look up some pictures of their house. They were some pretty eccentric people. They collected a lot of musical instruments. They never threw away newspapers. They sort of make the people on the show, hoarders, look like neophytes when it comes to collecting stuff around the house, if collecting is what you really want to call it. But Homer and Langley are not fictional people. He greatly fictionalizes their life, of course, because it is a novel. But they're based on historical people that actually were born towards the tail end of the 19th century, and they both died in 1948. So that having been said, I did want to point out there's sort of a linchpin of certain kinds of American folklore and Americana. So I wanted to point that out. I know they're not the most popular, the most popular people. So I did want to point out that this novel is actually based on the lives of two real people. Homer and Langley have sort of entered the canon of American folklore in a way that few other eccentrics have. Books have been written about them, and we all know the kind. They're best described as salacious or tell-all. They've been turned into lurid objects of intrigue, almost wholly with little respect for their humanity or the forces that shaped them into the kinds of people that they were. But Doctorow's project is really different here. He's interested in the historical forces that made Homer and Langley, not the sensationalizing journalism that turns them into hoarders, that word I used earlier, a word that thankfully doesn't even appear in the novel. So after Langley's return from World War I, and he returns shell-shocked, he learns what Homer has known for a while, that both of their parents have succumbed to the Spanish flu. Their parents left them a 4-story brownstone and an income that's never disclosed, but obviously enough to keep them relatively comfortable. But through ingenuity, they end up sort of making their own living in various different kinds of ways. They host a series of public dances for the community's benefit, and as time wears on, Langley starts to become increasingly paranoid about household finances, even challenging the utilities company and the bank who holds the house to come and get what they're owed from him personally. This is when his collections of books, musical instruments, automobiles, and other material all start to appear. Throughout the book, both brothers, Homer and Langley, but especially Homer, encounter romantic attachments that never really blossom. Doctorow draws Langley as more of an aloof figure, but I really, truly, deeply felt Homer's need for love and affection. Maybe like Tiresias, the figure from Greek mythology, his blindness conferred upon him another, greater kind of sight, a sight of innocence, of love, and of companionship, all of which Langley wanted nothing to do with. All I can really say here about this is that Homer's disappointments were heartbreaking for me as a reader. Doctorow is as fascinated with American history as, say, Don DeLillo and Thomas Pynchon are with American hysteria. Though this is only my second Doctorow novel, the first I read was The City of God, which I don't remember much about at all because I read several years ago. But it seems that much of his work is crafted in such a way as to have the reader feel that history is actually running past or even running through you. The effect of this can be both enchanting and disorienting. Doctorow extends Homer and Langley's lifetimes by several decades. I think I said earlier they both died in 1948. They actually both died in 1947, if I'm not mistaken. So he extends their lives by several decades so that we read of them speaking about the moon landing in 1969 and then Jonestown a decade later. This is partially what I mean by disorienting. I realize that this is a work of fiction, it's a novel, but this need to extend their lives by more than a generation seemed like an odd, out-of-place decision. I felt that there was plenty of fascinating history to deal with before the date of their real deaths, not to have almost turned them into centenarians, as they would have been in the late 70s when Jonestown took place. On the whole, this was an empathetic portrayal of two people whose histories and historiographies are in dire need of sympathy, and I really appreciate that as a reader again. There is something about the overall execution of the novel that I can't quite put my finger on that leaves me, on the whole, not as moved as I felt I should have been. Despite Langley's experiences in the war and Homer's failures in love. I'm curious to know what readers of other Doctorow novels think compared to this one, or if they can even be compared. And in the end, I was sort of waffling between 3 or 4 stars, and I came down on 3. This is one of the rare 3-star books that I would recommend to other people. Most 3-star books I wouldn't. But just for me, it didn't quite have that many of the fulfilling aspects of a novel for me. But if you're a fan of other Doctorow fiction, certainly look into it. E.L. Doctorow's Homer and Langley.